Hello, everyone. We might get started now that everyone has joined me from the panel. Um, I want to welcome today's webinar on care inclusivity in the workplace. And this will really be a discussion around how employers can stay informed and proactive in supporting workers juggling complex care needs, something in which 2.65 million Australians are contending with every day. This important conversation aligns with the newly launched Care Inclusive Workplace Initiative, spearheaded by the Department of Social Services alongside Carers Australia. We will be talking more about this initiative as we roll into the conversation. I'm Tala Lambert Patel. I'm the editor-in-chief of Women's Agenda and your moderator for today's discussion. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Bundjalung people, the traditional custodians of the land from which I am joining this session today. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. I also encourage attendees watching to share the land in which they're joining the session today in the chat box, and I'd also encourage viewers to send questions through as we move along, and we'll try to get to these with the panelists as well. So with that said, joining me today are four incredible panelists, each bringing unique insights into care inclusivity. So Antoinette Totter is a seasoned leader with extensive experience in banking, financial services, retail, government, and community organisations. She specialises in leadership, change management, diversity, inclusion, and well-being. She is deeply committed to fostering an exceptional employee and client experience through cultural change and inclusive workplace practices, and she is currently the head of diversity and inclusion at Hall and Wilcox law firm. Christine Rawlinson is the project manager at Neighbourhood Houses Victoria. She's also a carer of two people with significant support needs and brings a unique perspective as a former health professional, policymaker, and NDIS community educator. She currently manages carers and inclusion projects, aspiring to establish neighbourhood carers clubs in over 420 communities in Victoria and nationally. Christine is also the president of PS My Family Matters, supporting carers to pursue their aspirations. And welcoming Annabelle Reid, who is the CEO of Carers Australia. Annabelle joined Carers Australia in March 2024, bringing over a decade of not-for-profit executive experience in the healthcare sector. Her expertise spans leadership, commercial transformation, advocacy, operational excellence, and change management. She is passionate about supporting carers, drawing on her personal experience and commitment to creating purpose-led teams. And we also have Jacqueline de Mamiel. Jacqueline is a passionate advocate for young carers, having provided care for her two brothers with disabilities and her mother during her battle with breast cancer. She is a young carer ambassador for Little Dreamers Australia and uses her lived experience to raise awareness and advocate for improved support for young carers. Jacqueline is pursuing studies in politics and international studies and Chinese studies at the University of Melbourne. Thank you for joining us. Jack, I wanted to start with you because you are 19 years old. And when we think of caregiving, our minds would rarely go to the experience of someone so young. But you have been navigating this role as a carer for your two brothers for a number of years and also for your mum when she was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2016. Can you share a little bit more about this experience and your day-to-day challenges as a young carer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think often when we think of carers, we think of other adults caring for maybe their parents, the older generation, or caring for their own kids. But for me, I really was a child caring for other children. And I quite naturally took on a caring role from a very young age. So I have a twin brother. So going through all those stages together, starting off at the same school, I sort of felt like his built-in carer. And yeah, that came with a lot of challenges, in my daily life, managing my brother's medications, managing like their health crises, dealing with emergency services when necessary. They all took quite a big toll on me and are obviously not things that most children sort of experience at such a young age. So it's definitely been a big part of my life growing up and has taught me some really valuable skills about sort of communication and resilience and courage in quite daunting circumstances. But I guess I'm not the typical carer that you imagine. And my brothers aren't the typical people, that you imagine to be caring for. Both of them are, physically able-bodied. They don't need any mobility equipment or anything like that. So it can be quite hard to express to other people that I do have a really full-on caring role, and that does have a big impact on my life.
Mm, mm. We'll get to a bit more about your story and delve into that a little bit as we go along. But Chris, I want to bring you in here as well, because you have an extensive background as a carer and also as a health professional and policy maker in this space. What key insights have you gained about the specific needs of carers that employers often overlook in your personal experience of caring for your husband and your son?
Thank you. I suppose thanks for having me as well. This is really good to have the opportunity to share what I've learnt and the things that I wish I'd knew back then that I now know. And what I now know is that only a carer can truly appreciate the physical, the emotional, and the time intensive toll of being a carer. And I wish I'd known that when I was a health professional and then a policymaker. I think I would have made much better decisions and recommendations that actually affected people's lives. And Jack touched on this before, even if you're not in the act of providing physical care for your loved one, you're always on. You are always on duty. Their best interests are always front of mind. And I feel like my phone is constantly ringing. I'm always getting emails, often by professionals, which I was one of these people who would have done this in the past, who would just launch into a phone conversation about what's happening with my loved ones, with their programs, with their health, with tests, whatever. And it's as an expectation is that I don't actually have anything else going on in my life and that I can drop everything and provide an answer immediately and that I have the capacity to take on more roles. It makes, I hope I'm not talking inappropriately on behalf of all carers, but I know that other carers I've spoken with, we feel like we're doing lots of stuff, but we're not necessarily doing any of them as well as we'd like to because we've just got so many obligations. So we feel like we're letting our employer down. We're feeling like we're letting our loved ones down. We feel like we're letting our friends and families down. And what we tend to do is we overcompensate. We overwork and then we eventually burn out, and carers burning out isn't good for anyone. And what I do know is that carers do tend to be grateful. We're grateful for the opportunity to get a job that's in a flexible workplace, because if we find an employer who supports this ongoing tension between all of our roles, we're grateful. But with that in mind, we do need to be careful that this gratitude doesn't lead to that overcompensation, overwork, because carers aren't great at turning off. We're hypervigilant, and we're always in crisis management mode. So again, we can burn out. So my advice to employers is to reassure carers of their value, not only because they're carers, but because of their contribution as an employee. Carers don't need to prove anything and be above and beyond what is expected of other employees. And taking care of us carers, it's good for everyone. We're loyal, we're good at multitasking, and we also value the opportunity to have time away from our caring role and something that fulfills our identity beyond that of being a carer.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Antoinette, just on the back of what Christine has mentioned there around employee burnout or carer burnout, and also, overcompensating and needing to prove to employers that you're doing enough as a carer, and then subsequently doing too much, I guess. But you head up diversity and inclusion at Hall and Wilcox. You're well recognized for your care inclusive practices and being a progressive employer, but you also navigated that role as a carer for your mum during COVID. How has that experience influenced the way that you lead and the policies you champion in your organisation? And speaking to also the points that Christine raised there about, really making sure that you're aware and responsive to those issues.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me as well today. I'm in great company, but I think what what both Jack and Christine have said have really resonated. So, for example, I've always taken for granted that I've been a carer for most of my life. I come from a very big family. I'm an aunt to lots of nieces and nephews. So I was quite young when I became an aunt. So also took on a caring role and through that experience, but also through elderly parents. So I lost my dad almost 4 years ago, and having had to care for him in a really immediate capacity as well, so through his dementia and things like that, and then now have mum. So I've had to relocate, have moved back in with mum informally, and I really recognise that part of what really makes me understand what that caring role is, that I've been able to bring that lens and that perspective into the workplace, because majority of the conversations around caring for a big proportion of my career has always revolved around parental care, so young children, which is absolutely a great need, and that's, you know, equally as important. But as you get older, people in your life also get older, so the differentiation between caring for younger family members and then older, and it's a very different perspective as well. So, for example, often the child will then become the parental role. So having that understanding of really a compassionate view of what caring requires, it changes through life stages and through ages for everybody. Everyone will be a carer in a different capacity as they progress through their career, and that doesn't change, it just evolves. So really making sure that we have a really broadened view of what a carer is within our own organisation, understanding that you know, some of our people who are looking after children are also looking after elderly family members. So really making sure our policies and our practices really advocate for that, and really creating a culture of conversation around being honest around what your needs are. So when I started with the firm, I started in the first time in my career in a part-time role. I'd always worked full-time, so it was a very different experience for me personally, but also juggling the needs of multiple people whilst I also had a role to fulfill in my organisation. So starting in a new firm, really being very open and transparent about what my needs were and what my capacity would be and what I could definitely try and help achieve. And pleasantly finding that it was a very responsive conversation. I was in there with a battle thinking I had to fight a big fight, but in actual fact, it was quite a very inclusive conversation, just being really open and transparent about what those needs were, and finding that in conversation is commonality. That was key. So that's really helped to inform my view of how we can be a really caring, inclusive organisation.
How do employers foster those conversations better? Because you just made that key point about, you know, commonality, but often, you know, we are holding this information back and we don't feel safe and comfortable to divulge what's going on in our lives. So what are the proactive steps that employers can take there?
I think as managers, asking a question. So even, you know, we all get to know our people that we work with and colleagues quite well, but sometimes we don't create that, we don't open that door for them to be truly vulnerable around what their needs are and requirements are. So I think it's just creating an honest conversation that's proactive rather than reactive, to say, okay, you know, everyone will have a weekly or fortnightly or a regular catch up. They're the times that are really important to be able to lean into those conversations, led by the manager, but also led by the individual who might be experiencing some of those challenges. And I think really being open to understanding what they are, you know, it's human centric. It's putting the individual at the heart of the conversation. They are not unique to individuals. Everyone will experience those challenges. So really making sure that people understand that there are options without having to make choices that compromise on your own career trajectory, for example, or being where you need to be. So I think demonstrating that vulnerability is important. And we've done it a lot more from a parental care perspective. You know, children will need you to be at a particular point, whether you have school engagements or whatever it might be. So getting the conversation to lean more into different aspects of caring has really been an evolving piece. And I think the more we have conversations, the better they'll be. And I think I have the privilege being in the diversity and inclusion space where I can lead those conversations based on my experience. So it allows other people to be vulnerable. And I've had lots of conversations with people who feel they're constantly battling that they need to make a choice. So really making sure we equip managers to understand what the issues are, providing platforms that where everyone can engage in at different times based on their need at that very moment in time, but really setting the scene for people to really lead with care and compassion. That's been a key thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Annabelle, I want to bring you in here. From your perspective, what are the key elements that define a care inclusive workplace, and how can organisations ensure they meet those standards?
Thank you. And I really want to acknowledge the experiences that have just been shared with everyone, because what Chris and Jack and Antoinette are really illustrating is that, you know, caring can be a really large responsibility. And we know that carers on average spend about 36 hours a week caring. But for carers in some areas, that can be up to 105 hours. So if we think about that, it's almost like a full-time or 2.5 full-time jobs on top of paid employment, which obviously makes it really challenging. So what's essential, and I think Antoinette's sort of spoken to this a lot, is initially that flexibility, so that a carer can accommodate those responsibilities they have, such as taking someone the person they care for, to a medical appointment outside their working arrangements. So we're really talking about flexibility in terms of hours. There might be start and finish times, but also location, like working from home if there are things, you know, the carer is juggling. Inclusive and proactive practices are always also really important. So imagine if a carer does have to be absent from the workplace for a period of time, you know, we're really looking for, you know, ideally an employer can work with that carer and have that open conversation, as Antoinette was talking about, to see how they want to be involved in the workplace while they have to take time out, and that might be inclusion in team meetings or updates and things like that, so that they can remain connected to their workplace and be acknowledged, even though they're you know, taking on another responsibility at that time. And lastly, I think it's about the employer being responsive. That might be a last minute request. As I'm sure the rest of the panel understand, caring can be, you know, can get surprises and interruptions, and things come up that are unexpected, and you have to respond because it might be really critical that you do something. There could be an emergency situation. So having an employer that's able to be responsive and understand that it's not always planned time away or planned flexibility, things can come up. And I think that's where those ongoing, you know, conversations are really important. So we've obviously got, you know, the Carer Inclusive Workplace Initiative. So there are resources there to help a little more with that. But you know, if an employer wants to take it further, they can also participate in an accreditation program. And that's run by Carers New South Wales. It's called Carers Plus Employers. And that program sort of is a continuation of our program. So our workplace can become an accredited carer inclusive workplace.
Yeah, brilliant. What are the main benefits for employers listening today around the Care Inclusive Workplace Initiative?
Yeah, great, thank you. So look, if we think about the fact that carers make up 11% of the population, so you spoke before, it's about 2.65 million people. That's a lot of talent, and it's a lot of talent that we're probably not tapping into, because you know, not everyone understands the flexibility a carer might need to participate in the workplace. So we also know about 40% of recruiters and HR teams are struggling and are really challenged with recruiting. So I think the immediate benefit is where there's flexibility and openness in the workplace, it's tapping into a talent pool that might be not yet tapped into. And we know carers you know, becoming a carer can be sudden. It can happen over time, and it can happen to anyone, right? So we're really talking about a very broad spectrum of employable, talented people that are right there ready to take advantage of an opportunity. We also know that carers are very underrepresented in the workforce. So there's a 2018 survey of disability, ageing and carers, and it tells us about 53.8% of primary carers, so the person that has primary responsibility for caring, are employed in paid employment. So that's just over half, compared to non-carers or other Australians who are employed at a rate of about 81%. So we can see there's a really big differential there, and it does affect carers' lives in terms of the, you know, income and superannuation and those sort of things. There's a financial flow and impact for carers. So tapping into that talent pool is the primary benefit, but there are also other benefits like really high quality of staff, because you can find, you know, that other talent that may not have been available. Also increasing that staff retention. So, you know, carers often have to leave their roles when something comes up or their caring responsibility increases. So with flexible workplace practices, it means you can retain a really great staff member that otherwise would have made a decision to leave or move part-time. And we know there are costs associated with recruiting and constantly onboarding people. There's time sinks. So retaining staff is obviously front of mind, I think, for HR professionals. But also think about the quality of your team's outputs when you know that they understand they're part of a workplace that cares about them, that is flexible and responsive. It means that they're reflecting those values, they feel included, and there's a positive work culture, and that has a flow-on effect to reduced absenteeism and improve work quality, as you know, your team are imbuing those values of care and inclusion and using those values when they're engaging with stakeholders or clients or customers of your business. So there are a lot of benefits to being a care and inclusive workplace.
Yeah. And when we're talking about 2.65 million people in the country, you know, this isn't small bickies like that. And when we're talking about the economic cost of not supporting carers properly, it is seismic. So thank you for sharing that. Antoinette, just on what Annabelle has shared there, how has implementing care inclusive policies at Hall and Wilcox, in your opinion, impacted employee engagement, retention, and overall organisational productivity?
I think it's been fundamental. I think what we refer to as COVID as the great equaliser in requiring flexibility. It really clarified that flexibility is an option around working from home, for example, where, you know, in the professional services or the legal profession was not always seen as something that's possible, you know, had to be client facing, responsive, and that meant being on site in front of somebody. So I think what COVID did was really reshift in terms of what flexibility is can be and what it can be for people across every organisation. So, you know, recognising that there are some roles that can be less flexible, but in terms of anyone delivering roles from, you know, from within the home is a possibility. So I think that really equalised flexibility for everyone, but it really supported everyone to understand that actually that flexibility is going to support everyone in their caring role as well. So, you know, the flexibility of having to attend appointments or whatever it might be. So it just created a bit of a mind shift that it is for everyone for different reasons, and it can be supported. So really then it just required, it was a gateway for other ideas around what flexibility could be. So it really, the value proposition of any organisation who can truly offer that in different ways, you know, workplace culture, it's you know, it's embedded in our culture, what we call our hallmarks as well. So really making sure that people who are attracted to coming to our organisation understand that this is how we feel about flexibility, making sure it's enabled, making sure that everyone can support their own life needs across different career stages. So it's definitely helped both our retention. We definitely have a great retention rate. It engages our people as well. So people are looking. So what used to be considered as a value on is fundamental and critical for just the basic needs for what an organisation needs to offer. So it really is reshaping what future organisations really need to focus on as well. And there is an untapped market. So I think creating those employment opportunities and career pathways for those who've been left out is a great opportunity for them from a mental health and wellbeing, but also financial wellbeing perspective for sure.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point you just raised about, making flexibility actually flexible. I think employers, even progressive employers where we're trying to make traction here are often quite rigid about how they view flexibility. And really, once we learn to embrace that concept in all its facets, I think we'll see a lot more progress and a lot more support for all workers. So that, I think that's great that's really something that Holland Wilcox has recognised from the outset. Jack, I'd love your kind of thoughts here in terms of employment and navigating that as a young carer, because I think, young people do face far more kind of complex situations and different issues at play, I guess. In the ways that employers have treated your situation, have you been able to find that flexibility and the understanding that, Antoinette has spoken about, but within a law firm? What's your experience been?
Yeah, I think it's very different as a young person, because a lot of people my age, like you mentioned, I'm 19, so I'm working casual roles, and I have been since I started working. I was first an umpire in like my local netball program, and then I moved into like a retail position at a bakery, and now I'm working as a swimming teacher. And like Antoinette said, with the diversity within flexibility, I think that's really important for casual workers, because for me, working from home wouldn't have been an option for any of those roles. Like the bakery's at the bakery, swim teaching has to be at the pool. So it's really different for young people. And I think for other young carers, there is a lot of uncertainty and anxiety around the way that your caring role and those responsibilities affect your employability, because as a casual, that you can just, not be allocated more shifts. There's less job certainty. And that does come with the casual loading, which is a great help for young people. And, when we're studying at university, they are very costly ways of living. So that's really valued, the casual loading. But then it does mean that we don't get carers leave, like most people who are employed part-time or full-time. And yeah, it's hard to sort of be supported. I've had a lot of really understanding and empathetic bosses and managers, but it's quite hard to implement flexibility because a lot of these roles do rely on a young workforce. And so around sort of exams, end of school terms, end of university semesters, when there's a lot of assessments, a lot of their staff want to take time off to study and things like that. So if you're also trying to take time off for a caring role, it can be quite disruptive and, hard for them to offer you the flexibility in terms of changing shifts last minute or something like that, because often the onus is on you to find someone to cover your shift. And if you're struggling with your caring role and all those added responsibilities, sort of the last thing you need to be doing is calling up all of your co-workers and trying to find someone to cover you, when it can be quite hard to explain the reason why you need a cover.
Yeah. Do you have some thoughts around, policies or initiatives that would help young carers in particular?
I think the main thing is just awareness with the Care Inclusive Workplace Initiative. If my bosses were aware before I approached them about what a carer is and what that can mean, and how that can mean that, last minute I might not be able to attend work, or I need to have my phone on at work in case I get an important call from a family member. They're things that seem unreasonable or a bit shocking when you first approach an employer about that, because things like turning your phone off and always showing up consistently to your shifts are like a baseline expectation. So I think it would be really great if as the young carer, the onus wasn't on you to introduce the people that your employers and your bosses to the world of caring, especially when as a casual and as a young person in the workforce, often our managers are other children. Like I often found when I was younger and sort of getting my first casual job after school, I was like the junior retail assistant or something like that. And my manager would be a 16-year-old in year 10 and I was in year 9. So it's really hard if the other person that is more senior than you in that company is also a young person. I think it's really important that at a higher up, more systemic level, that the employers are aware of a caring role so that, they can manage the sort of implementation of flexible work hours and things like that, rather than leaving it to a manager who might also be a young person. And that's quite confusing if they haven't had that lived experience.
I think that's a really good point. Chris, I want to go to you now. I want to ask if you can share a specific instance where your employer's support, and I know that we spoke earlier and you did mention that your employer has been quite supportive in your caregiving role, has made a significant difference to your ability to balance work and caregiving responsibilities.
Yeah, can I just start? I think what we're coming to with this is that it's just that being able to have a very open discussion about what the boundaries are, what the rules are, but also what the non-negotiables are. My husband was in ICU a couple of weeks ago, and that's not negotiable. I'm going to drop everything and be at his bedside if he's in ICU, and having a workplace that gets that and can pivot when I've just say, look, I know this is not the most reliable I've been, but my husband's in ICU. I need to be there with him because I'm his advocate and I'm the one who does all the talking for him. But I suppose an acknowledgement and an understanding, because there's been many times when I felt that it would be easier just to pack it all in and just be a full-time carer and go on the carer pension, because I would feel less guilty about not giving my husband and my son all the care that they need and that they deserve from me. Because as much as there are a whole lot of funded supports through NDIS and My Aged Care and, the health system, I feel that I'm genuinely the best placed person to be their carer, their advocate, their supporter. And if I did that, though, it's a really tough choice. Carers are left with all of these choices all the time. I can do that and feel better about me being a carer, but then I'd have to live below the poverty line. And also, then my whole identity would be tied to being a carer. And I worry then what that would do to our relationship, because I wonder then whether I would be resenting that caring role, and that, without doing it consciously, maybe I would, really resent that my personal aspirations have had to be relinquished because of that caring role.
Yeah.
But then when you say, okay, I will work because, and my son and my husband are very supportive, they want me to work. They know that I'm happier when I work. But because of my caring role, I do have to work limited hours. So that means my income is half than what it should be. I've got nowhere near as much as super as I should have. So I'm either working in my paid job or working in my unpaid job, but I'm still in financial hardship. And then I've got this nagging, anxiety about my financial future, because I know I don't have a nest egg. I know I haven't, my career probably isn't at the level it would have been otherwise because of this situation. So then I'm left with the feeling, well, working is a luxury. And me taking on this luxury is being a bit of I'm being selfish. So it's this push and pull. And the not negotiable is if it comes down to something really serious that needs to be taken care of with my loved ones, they're first.
Yeah.
But being safe to have these discussions where you're actually quite vulnerable in your workplace is important. And I'm lucky that I've been able to have that. And, I am a very open communicator, so can say, this is what's happened. I'm not going to be in today. But that's that open two-way communication is really important.
Yeah. Jack, I think in our previous conversations around this, you kind of alluded to something similar that that has just been shared by Chris, and it was around accommodations that are afforded to caregivers being seen as privileges, and how we kind of shift that narrative. I'd love to kind of hear your perspective on that as well.
Yeah, I think it's really sort of jarring for us as carers to be positioned as like lucky, or yeah, we are privileged to have the accommodations that make the workforce accessible to us, when we sort of witness the people that we care for have their disability needs and the accommodations for their health conditions or whatever it might be seen as like a legal requirement and an absolute necessity. And when we were talking before, another day, the panelists and I, we were mentioning that like, if someone you cared for did need a mobility aid, say, for example, a wheelchair, and their workplace installed a ramp, in a spot they needed it to help them access the workplace, we wouldn't be like, wow, you're so lucky that your employer is so thoughtful, But we're, as carers who do support people with those sort of needs, when we say things like we need flexible hours, or there may be times where you can't work a shift at a short notice, it is seen like you're unreliable, and that's like a personal flaw in your work ethic. And if they are understanding of that, it's a privilege to have an employer who is so accommodating. And obviously, like Chris was saying, as carers, I feel like we are very grateful. Like, I really appreciate the empathy and the support of my employer, who is really understanding of my situation. But that it's like an inconvenience and a burden on them to be making those accommodations, especially at short notice. And then it does, make you feel quite guilty, like Chris was saying, if I can't go into a shift at work last minute, I feel terrible, but there's a lot going on already. So you really don't need that added sort of emotional burden of dealing with your feelings of the employer. And I think in smaller organizations, which young people often do work in those casual positions, it is quite tight-knit, and there's not that many positions between you as a sort of junior employee and the boss. And therefore it feels quite like personal, that connection with the people above you, your bosses, your managers. So you feel quite like guilty for letting them down because you know them so well.
Annabelle, just on what Chris and Jack have shared there, do you have thoughts around how employers can, and any Australian really that's dealing with this and communicating and being in contact with carers, and we all are, and as Antoinette noted earlier, we all are carers at some point as well, but how do we get better at alleviating that guilt and making sure that carers are truly supported emotionally and mentally as well?
We're really talking about social change that needs to happen, and I think it starts with recognition of the carer role. I think, even the word carer, when I say that, a lot of people immediately think of a paid support worker, or they think of parenting. They don't think about somebody who's caring for someone with a disability or a chronic health condition, dementia, and so on. So I think, until it becomes part of an individual's journey, they probably don't understand and need help understanding what that means and what that looks and feels like. Because when I was talking about those hours, 36, 105 hours a week, you say that to someone and they're usually fairly shocked because they haven't really played it through and thought about what that might mean. So I do think recognition of the carer role and explaining what it is and how many people it affects and how it affects them is important, particularly to employers who have the power, to enable change in the workplace for carers. I think when we're talking about carer guilt, and I've heard that threaded through all these conversations, and I relate. This is a really difficult thing, and I know we're part of a national carer network, and there are carer organisations all around Australia and addressing that guilt in accessing respite, for example. So, so carers can take a break. Often carers feel like taking a holiday is a step way too far. Everyone else can have one, but should I even take a break? And of course, it is in fact necessary for carers to take that break to remain healthy. And Chris, you're really talking about that mind struggle that you have balancing with things you need for you, because carers are people, carers have needs, carers' well-being and mental health is really important. Or they can't do a great job of being a carer, but also it's just important because they're a human. and they need those things. So I think addressing that guilt by identifying that carers really do need time out and a break, it in fact is healthy and necessary, and helps them keep balance and maintain their own health, because some people who are carers, have a very challenging responsibility, and without support they can fall apart. And what then? What for the person they care for? And then they also need care too.
Yeah.
So I think we can probably, as a society, do a good job of reinforcing that it's positive for carers to take a break. Of course, they're entitled to work. They have rights like everybody else. They're not to be treated like background furniture, as they sometimes are by health systems and things. So,
yeah, absolutely.
We're talking about, really powerful social change that needs to happen.
Yeah, in a big way. Chris, to that point, and drawing on what you shared just before around the guilt, and also what you said earlier about needing to overcompensate at work and kind of go harder, and putting in all of those long hours as a caregiver as well. How do you, and Jack, interested in your thoughts here, Antoinette, Annabelle, how do you support your emotional and mental well-being? Do you have any kind of time or ability to do that?
No.
Yeah.
I suppose this is one of the good things, though, about having paid employment when you're a carer, because when you're a carer at home, the OH&S system as a home carer is non-existent, and we'll just keep doing what we have to do no matter what. But then going into a paid job, then you find out that you can clock on and clock off, and you can have support from systems like EAP, where you can get counselling and other supports. You can get some paid leave. So I think that really helps, is if you say, well, this is my paid work and I get entitlements with this. How can I make the most of that? That's probably going to be what helps you. And what I've personally found is being part of a team where I'm recognised for my skills as a professional and a person separate to being a carer. That's been great for my self-esteem, and I probably have said that's what's given me my mojo back, is being able to do that sort of stuff. So what carers do tend to do is our social circle shrinks, because we're so busy either doing the paid work or the unpaid work. But that social network that you get through being part of a team, that's been a really amazing benefit for me, joining the paid workforce again. So that's something that has really, I've found helpful. And probably that's what's filling my cup.
Yeah, and possibly something that employers, again, need to be more kind of cognizant of as we move along, around how they can foster those experiences in a more meaningful sense for carers within the workplace, just as another kind of, I guess, add on to policy that they're producing in this space. So, Jack, I want to hear your thoughts on that as well, and whether or not you're able to get any kind of emotional or mental relief at the moment.
It definitely is very challenging, but I also think it is quite a unique situation as a young person. A lot of the respite I found was from Little Dreamers, which is Australia's leading organisation supporting young carers. And I've now become an ambassador, young carer ambassador for them, which is very exciting. But that was really life-changing for me when I came across this organisation. And it links into what Annabelle was saying about like not being recognised as a carer. I didn't know what a young carer was before I heard of Little Dreamers in 2020. So I was 15, turning 16 that year. So I'd gone a long time in my caring role, just describing it as having a hard home life, or a challenging family situation, and having that identity in the label as a young carer was really validating, and it allowed me to access supports like Little Dreamers, which does give me respite. And I think it's important to identify that young carers, respite looks a bit different for them. I don't need to go on a holiday or anything like that. I'd love to, but it's not necessary as a child to have that as a form of respite. I think it's just important to allow young carers to actually be children. I found that growing up, I spent a lot of time being quite serious and responsible, and really on, like Chris mentioned, identifying triggers for my brothers, like looking out for things that were overwhelming in terms of sensory input and trying to mitigate that and how they would respond to that. So really being like switched on and attentive and serious and dealing with people a lot older than me, medical professionals, emergency services workers, that I think it's really important in terms of that emotional and mental health support, that you do have like those fun respite opportunities where, Little Dreamers has these holiday programs where we'll go to like Bounce or the Australian Open or something that's just totally fun, unrelated to your caring role, where you can just be a kid and be silly and don't have to be so responsible and brave. And, they're great qualities, but it is exhausting to maintain them all the time.
Yeah. Doesn't seem like a very big request from my end. I want to just ask quickly, Annabelle, with the initiative, the Care Inclusive Initiative now launched, in a long-term sense, what legislative or policy changes do you believe are necessary to better support carers in the workplace across Australia? And how does the vision created from the Care Inclusive Workplace Initiative tie into that?
Thank you. Goody, I get to talk about things I want. I think our response to the 2022 Senate inquiry into work and care really encapsulated three pillars we saw as important for policy, to sort of structural change, if you like. And it starts with more flexible workplaces, as the initiative, is advocating for. It also included adequate substitute care or respite. So that is an enabling mechanism for sometimes some carers really need, they need help taking care of the person they care for so that they can uplift and move into paid employment or be somewhere else. And lastly, it was some mechanisms around the rules that carers had to access support. So an example of that is the carer payment. And happily, we achieved a change to this, but there was a rule that said if you could only work 25 hours a week, but you could only do education for 25 hours a week or work, including travel, including volunteer time. And if you hit all those KPIs, you could get the carer payment. But now, happily, it's changing, and that action should happen next year, where it's more flexible over 100 hours and it excludes education. So, for a young carer like Jack, previously it may have excluded some university degrees because they require more than 25 contact hours, which meant a young carer couldn't be a carer and go to university and receive that supplement. So it obviously also allows carers to participate in more paid employment because there's greater flexibility. Imagine if you're rural or remote and they include your travel time and your work time and penalise you for it. It was extremely difficult. The other things that are really important, I think, is acknowledging the role of a carer as separate to being a parent. So at the moment, parental leave and carers leave is conflated. It's just one block. But a lot of other OECD countries have separate recognition for caring leave, and it is recognised and legislated and funded, sometimes by insurance mechanisms, sometimes by the employer or publicly funded. So I can give you a few examples. For example, UK offers an extra week of dedicated carers leave for carers per annum, and that's paid leave. We're asking for that in Australia right now. Canada offers like 15 to 35 weeks with financial assistance. So it's like a part funded, you get 55% of your earnings during that time. Austria offers 2 to 6 weeks of paid carers leave, and Japan, I think, has 93 days per family member. So, different OECD countries do it differently, but we are behind the 8 ball on this one, and we really need to look at the leave we have that's dedicated to carers and legislate that so it's not as optional for employers and it's expected and funded. That would really help.
Yeah. We do have a question that's come in. I'm conscious of time, and I know that we could keep going all day, and I'd actually, love to hear from you all day. But we've got a question from someone watching, and we've had some really great comments and thoughts from others as well. But what are some legislative changes that could help improve the financial future of carers, especially when it comes to superannuation? Annabelle, I might jump to you on that one as well.
Sure, a pet topic for me. So Carers Australia absolutely wants to see superannuation on top of the carer payment. And the reason for that is that there are compound effects of being a carer, but one of them is a loss of superannuation. And on average, for an average carer, that's around 176,000 at the time of retirement. But for a carer that has a longer trajectory, so the average time someone is caring for another person is about 11 and a half years. But if you think about a younger carer starting early, or parents of a child with a disability where it may be lifelong care, that difference in super can be around $400,000 and around $900,000 in lifetime earnings. So that's a massive financial impact. And Chris was speaking to it. Becoming a full-time carer on the carer payment means living below the poverty line, but then there's that double whammy at the end where you don't have enough to retire on. And if you're the financial breadwinner for the person you care for, there can be intergenerational impact. So maybe the child you care for, then when you have to leave them money, there isn't enough money to leave them as well, which is going to impact their lives. So the superannuation question is really important, and we need to find a way to do that, to give super on the carer payment. There are also some other ideas we'd be keen to explore around tax breaks and things like that. But that when we acknowledge that about a quarter of all carers are age 65 plus, many of our carers are already in the age where they should be retiring, but might not have retired because they can't afford it. So that's where the superannuation again becomes so important.
Yeah, 100%. It just seems like there are so many kind of giant gaps in this space that we really need to look at so much more closely, so much more acutely. Again, conscious of time, but I just wanted to ask the panel, whether or not there's anything else that they would really like to leave viewers of this session with today. Any other kind of thoughts or feelings? Chris, I might start with you.
The thing that's coming to mind is not so much with me, because I'm very public about my caring role, and that's why I did that podcast called Care Factor. But caring is a very personal role. Like, I don't want to tell everybody the ins and outs of what I do to look after my husband and son, because I want to actually respect their dignity. And, it is a very personal role. And I think that's part of it. We're not very good advocates for ourselves because we're not putting it out there and making it public, because we're often doing some very personal and private things, and we really want to respect the dignity of those for whom we care. So we're a bit of a silent population, even though that's 11% of us out there. And it's already been said, if you're not a carer now, you will have already been one, or you will be one. And the more that workplaces understand all of these issues, the better. So I don't think it's just about management. I think it's about everybody in every workplace needs to understand, not just so that the workplaces are better, but just so that people are prepared for when this happens to them or for someone they care about as well.
Yeah, and don't just assume that because it is a silent population that the problem doesn't exist and that the support isn't needed. And for everyone watching today, please do jump in and take a look at Chris's podcast, Care Factor, as well. It's brilliant. So Annabelle, just jumping to you now.
I think the most important thing we can do is recognise who carers are. And if we simply start that conversation, that enables all of the changes we're looking for to flow from it. And it's probably very similar to Chris's comments. With a fairly silent population, there are people out there that don't yet label themselves as a carer, and Jack spoke to that as well. It can take a few years to self-identify as a carer and therefore access support, flexibility, and those things you need, particularly in the workplace. So the more we talk about it and recognise and acknowledge that carer role and what it looks like, the more people will understand and can contribute positively.
Yeah, absolutely. Antoinette?
I would just finally add that question for purpose is my mantra. So allowing an opportunity for people to self-identify, but also match that identification with other options, people benefits that might be required that we don't currently offer. So really making sure there's space for people to self-declare their needs, but also respond to that as an employer. So what does that mean? Do you need additional leave, for example, or do you need additional benefits that address a particular area? So EAP, we know that there are intersectional areas as well. So there are family dynamics around carers, you know, who takes what responsibility. So I know we haven't really covered that in this discussion today, but that's a whole other Pandora's box, if you like. It certainly does impact familial relationships that then impact on workplace. So I think it's really just giving people the opportunity to disclose and then respond to what they actually might need that we haven't asked, because if you don't ask, you don't know. So I think it's really important to be able to create an opportunity for people to share that responsibility and then respond to it with particular needs that haven't been addressed.
Yeah, and don't let your discomfort at asking get in the way.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Jack.
I think really adding on to what Chris said, it's so important for employers and just society as a whole to take young people and their caring roles seriously. Like Chris said, often you're caring for people who are really distressed, and the hardest part of my caring role is when the people I'm caring for are in crisis. And in order for me to, like explain the gravity of my caring role, I would have to go into a lot of detail about really like distressing, traumatic circumstances that not only happen to me, but the people I'm caring for. And that's not fair on them, because this is, a really hard time for them. So I think it's so important that sort of employers really take your word for it and understand that a young carer can start as young as 4 years old. Little Dreamers supports young people age 4 to 25. And it can be hard to imagine what sort of support a 4-year-old could provide, but a lot of emotional support and bonding with them, playing with your siblings, as I did with my twin brother. I think that's so important, because I started as a young carer at a really young age. So my caring role affected primary school, high school, now university. For me, it will affect me as I'm applying for roles post-university. So it's important to take that role seriously and understand that it had such an impact from such an early age for me. So many young carers have had those flow-on effects that will really impact them into the future. Yeah.
And thank you all so much for sharing, these experiences today. And, this is such a complex and personal issue, and it's hugely valuable to have these conversations up front, and it's hugely valuable for those that are joining in that might be experiencing, similar challenges, but equally, it is so important for employers to really engage in this topic and to look at the ways that we can do things more proactively and more comprehensively in this space. I think that, the key takeaway from this conversation is that caregiving is far from an isolated issue. It's really something that is going to impact, and it's the reality for millions of Australians each day. And as Antoinette said, it's something that we're all going to do at some point in our lives. Ultimately, we do need to get considerably better at being there for one another, and for employers to recognise and respond appropriately to evolving, competing care priorities. The Care Inclusive Workplace Initiative is the perfect start for this, and I just want to also add that I shared the link to the initiative in the chat box as well. It's designed to empower and upskill organisations on this issue, and for all of the progressive employers joining today, we encourage you to follow that link and to follow up with how you get started with the assessment. Once again, I just want to thank all of the panelists again today. So Jacqueline Demamiel, Chris Rawlinson, Antoinette Totter, and Annabelle Reid. And for anyone who's looking for more information on this, please just touch base with us at Women's Agenda. You can email us directly at contact@womensagenda.com.au, and we'll make sure that we put you in touch with the right people, including Carers Australia. So thank you so much.